Welcome to the Business Trendsetter Podcast, where we talk about trends and how to use them to grow your business. My name is Manny Charan, and off today is Adam. We do have a special guest, Luis Fernandez, who is going to introduce himself. I wanted to bring Luis here on board to talk about what's happening in his industry and get a boots on the ground understanding of what's happening with respect to trends and how his industry, I'll let him kind of talk about it in a bit, can really show the rest of us kind of where things are going with the economy. So welcome to the show, Luis.
Thanks, Manny. Appreciate it, man. Thanks
All right.
for having me.
Give us a little bit of about your background and what industry you're in.
Sure. So I'm a former Army officer, got out after about 7 years in the Army, and went to work for John Deere for some time, and then worked for Caterpillar for some time, and now I'm an independent consultant, working a lot with heavy equipment companies, helping them with their operational excellence stuff. And I've worked in and around pretty much all of the different industries, from oil and gas and mining, construction, commercial mowing, agriculture, and seen, the businesses that require us to move dirt and use the land to generate money. So.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So we talk to a lot of different people all across the industries, whether it's in AI or the gig economy. We talk about these pretty major trends that are happening right now, and having your perspective is interesting because we don't think about how much is really required in our daily life in order to have. We talk about AI, but if you're going to have AI, you've got to have these big server farms, and if you're going to build server farms, you got to build the structure. So, what is your take on how important the heavy industry is to our nation's economy?
Honestly, I think it's something that is always going to be there, and we're going to, which is kind of what we're seeing now, is that we're going to impose limits on ourselves, and we find new ways of maximizing the resources that exist. So let me explain what I mean there. So let's talk about just like oil drilling. A century ago, how we extracted oil and what we were able to extract, very different than today. And we have been able to go back into locations that maybe we couldn't access those resources before and access them now.
Okay.
We're also finding new resources that we didn't know were important, right? As we move into this EV world with changing how we make batteries and the need for a better battery system, all these different metals and different equipment becomes important to the overall economy, whereas before it wasn't. I think Alabama is one recently. They found a source of, I don't want to say the wrong metal, but there's a new source of metal that's important with the EV batteries that they found there. And so the restrictions that we pose upon ourselves is around being good stewards of the environment. So there's a lot more focus, even in the last 20 years, in making sure that whatever we do, whatever we mine, whatever we extract from the earth, that we don't leave a damaging, long-lasting footprint into the future, and that it's extracted in the most environmentally friendly way possible.
Yeah, so we've talked about the idea of this ESG, environmental, social, and governance kind of investor, or people that are investing, if you will, with their dollars, right? They're going for company A over company B because company A is a better steward of the environment. And so that's very interesting to kind of bring that up. Not a lot of people really understand that, but I think you are showing us now that that's a big important piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely critical. And, when we think about just everyday operations, there are a lot of chemicals that go into what we do, both in the machines and then in use in the ground to access resources. And those have to be very tightly controlled, the protection of the groundwater systems and even the surface. You have a spill. Requirements are, immediate stoppage to clean up those spills and do so properly and mitigate all that. So Being stewards of the environment, it's I know a lot of folks will say, well, oil companies don't really care. And I'm sure there's evidence for some of that. But in general, from what I see on the day to day and on the ground, being good environmental stewards. And many of the people that are working in those fields live in that area too. So, it's they want to protect their backyard, but also recognize here's this resource that we have that's unique and necessary, and gives us an opportunity to generate wealth in our communities.
Sure. So we talk about a lot of trends here on our podcast. It's kind of the cornerstone, the Business Trendsetter Podcast, of course. And I'll kind of have a question regarding. So we've got demographics is one of the big ones. We've got AI. We've got the gig economy. We have mobility, and we have asynchronous life, or being able to communicate and do business not at the same time. Of those five, and I guess the sixth one is kind of the wild card as well, was the whole idea of the environmental concern. Do you think that your industry is the one you touched on, ag, mining, all those? How have you seen them change in the past, we'll say 5 years, with respect to the six trends I just listed here?
So I'll tell you, a lot of the impositions around focuses and needing operational efficiencies are typically from a regulation standpoint. So we could very cheaply extract a lot of this stuff and leave a mess behind. And so there's a lot of government impositions on regulations and penalties and the like that kind of lower those margins that are already tight, right? And then they're going to make those margins tighter. And so a lot of focus on how do we reduce those costs, which brings in particularly automation and predictive behaviors, right? So I can access a lot of information from how a machine is running in the field. Some of it, we may notice micro changes in something that will tell us that, based on the past, if we see this sort of this vibration in this particular system happen inside of this wavelength and inside of this time, that is an indication that it's going to fail within the next 100 hours or something. What we're running into, this is great because we want to get to a place where we're predictive about when our machines are going to fail and predictive about our maintenance. But there's so much data, especially if you start thinking about, here in our backyard, you've got somebody like Freeport, right? They've got thousands and thousands of machines out there running, and you have hundreds of data points per. It's impossible to put an eyeball on it, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to have some sort of automation to do some preliminary analysis, to throw up those red flags, to say, hey, here's an alert, here's a potential problem, here's a place you need to go looking, and you need to examine this location. So that is like one of the first implementations that I see happening today in the automated space. And then there's attempts at automating the execution of the work itself, with automated mining trucks and the like. I've seen some of that. I'm a little more skeptical about where we are in our ability to automate and use, this AI systems to replace human operators, because the output is only as good as the input, and it's really hard for us to predict when we're writing these programs, what something should be looking for and how to, enact behaviors based on that. I think maybe eventually we can get there. Today, I'm a little more cautious, especially with, our heavy equipment is not forgiving, and one mistake will cost you your life.
Yeah.
And I understand the safety benefits. There's a lot. Like, somebody that would disagree with me would come in here and give you all the reasons for it, and I could say, yeah, those are valid. I'm still a little bit more cautious. We're probably just in general, right? But we can see the integration of both. For instance, you go to a manufacturing facility and you'll see weld robots working alongside welders, right? And these people kind of work with the machine and using the machine. I see that certainly in the closer near future than these fully automated machines. But it's certainly something that this industry is looking to find as ways to maximize efficiency. What can we automate? How do we automate some tasks, and how do we reduce those overhead requirements and predictive more about our failures?
That's interesting. So my 17-year-old son is interested in potentially going into mining engineering as a career. So I had a buddy of mine who's a 35, 40-year veteran in the industry, actually an electrical engineer, but he went into mining. And we had lunch the other day. I'm doing my best to steward my son in a good direction. I mean, he'll be fine either way. But one thing the guy said, it was very interesting, that I kind of knew, but it was crystal clear after he said it. He says, the mining industry is extremely eager and anxious to try out new technologies. Solar, they're putting these solar panels out, they try them out in these crazy fields in the middle of nowhere. Drones, autonomous vehicles, blah blah blah, batteries. I mean, they're always the first to try stuff out, but they are the slowest to actually making them as a de facto standard, is what he said. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, we'll try everything out really quick. We'll be the first in line to try something out, but we'll be the last in line to make it an official thing that everybody else does in our industry. Do you see that?
That's interesting. I think a lot of that becomes very okay. A lot of that I think is dependent on the companies that are doing them. And then as I said that, I was also thinking that some company, like based on the size of a company, you're going to see a slower implementation. All right. So some of clients like working with John Deere, implementing something new is going to take a very long time. It is a very big ship to turn. And then I have some other smaller clients where, a year ago, I told them, hey, you should have a centralized system where you're gathering all this data and put your, engineers and mechanics in this same room and have all of these sets of information collecting and then making decisions out of this one room. And, 8-9 months later, it's implemented. Right. And so the experience may be, if you're coming from a large organization, that, hey, we're really down for trying new technologies, but we're really slow to implement them. I think that may have more to do with the size of the company than the nature of the business.
So let's talk about a little bit of your experience with, we talk about value and value delivery. Value is what is the customer client gaining from the experience, and then the value delivery is how do you actually take what your value is and give it to the client or give it to the customer. So it seems like your background is pretty heavily on the value delivery with operational excellence, right? You're taking something, how do you make it better? So give us a framework of what operational excellence means to you, and then I'll kind of come in with a couple questions regarding
that. So in the heavy equipment space, one of the things that I see very regularly is one, it's definitely a good old boy, right? Grandpa did this business and dad did this business and I do this business. And there's the mineral rights folks and, all of this kind of like, it's certainly a family business. And so and many of the people that are running these businesses also ran the equipment at one point. My clients typically, they have always worn boots and they need a shower when they get home from work every day. Like it's not an option, right? So if you think about like this type of, even though they're, making 7 figures and above a year, right? They get dirty. They don't, they wear jeans, right? Like this is the kind of, but with that, there's a stereotype in there as well that, the ideas of lean and all of this stuff, like we will solve the problems when they present themselves. Okay. And when you're talking about a $2 million or $3 million piece of equipment, That's a very expensive problem. And when that equipment isn't running, it's to the tune of thousands of dollars an hour that you're losing because that piece of equipment isn't running. So, um, many of our systems are what I call like this break fix. When something breaks, we fix it. And that's how we move along. That type of fleet management means that your costs to run your fleet, they're going to be erratic. You don't have a lot of control. It's going to be more expensive and less predictable. So you'd never know, like every day you're going out and you're rolling the dice, which of my pieces of equipment are going to fail today, right? And I help people move from that model to a predictive one where we know based on how we maintain our equipment and the like, when this equipment needs to come down before it breaks, and we can plan for it and we can plan our maintenance around it. So, this is the fix it faster when it's back. So when we take a piece of equipment down, we want to make sure our maintenance operations are coordinated, they're organized, they have the parts they need, they have the tools they need, the mechanic understands the repair and they do it right the first time, and we get the equipment back out faster. And then we also want to break it smaller and slower. So when a failure happens, that they're not catastrophic, that they're controlled, that every piece of equipment is going to fail. It's impossible that it doesn't. It's the way that these are designed, right? No one would expect to still be running a computer from 1999. Like, you understand the life cycle of all of the things that we own. There's a time when they go down. The only problem is that some folks are spending $3 million and they're running it 20 hours a day. And so you spend $3 million and you got to replace it every 3 years. That's hard to stomach, right? So how do we make it last longer? And break smaller, control it, move into that predictive maintenance, control those costs, understand what they are. And so that is really a large place where I focus a lot of my energy, and it generates, tens of millions of dollars for even some of the smaller clients as well, being able to do that.
I see that. You mentioned a couple of things in your talk here a bit, that one of the things that we also talk about at Spark Partners is the idea of removing bias. And, bias is a bitch, right? It can bite you in the butt. It can create lots of havoc. And we also talk about this idea of this thing called lock-in, which is you buy this $3 million piece of equipment. Now you're locked into it. And if things shift and change to a new direction, or maybe mining is done differently now, and your equipment is an old way of doing the mining, you're kind of locked into that. So that's really good that you kind of talked about those different areas. Would you, as far as in your understanding, the predictive maintenance framework, taking data, doing what you do in the predictive maintenance framework, wouldn't you consider that kind of a form of artificial intelligence?
Oh, definitely. And we implement some of it in some of these, like when I was talking about identifying a trend, right? So let's say, I want to keep my engine temperature above a certain number. If I alert when it drops below that, it may be too late. And then if I raise my temperature threshold, it may be too early, right? And so we create these AI models that will look at and say, okay, what does this equipment normally operate in? And what trends are we seeing in this equipment? To then raise that red flag and tell, these mechanics. So I'm taking these, usually my recommendation is take a very senior seasoned mechanic, the kind of guy who's been doing the job so long that climbing up on the machine kind of hurts his knees. And he's thinking about, like, I need to be somewhere else, but his knowledge base is so much that you don't want to lose that. And I put him behind a computer screen and I say, hey, this machine is going to tell you when to go look at something. And then I need you to go look at that machine and tell me what the problem is before it gets bad, right? And so this is the idea of the robotic welder, right? The robot's doing the lion's share of the work, and the guy is there to make sure that it's still working, right? And doing the appropriate task. And that's kind of how, right now, this is today, how we implement AI. In the future, I think a lot of that becomes where we're using it to understand the failure mode when the machine is being repaired. So some of it may be, there's situations where you could say, and I don't want to get like too technical in the repair side, right? So there's this thing called blow by that happens with diesel engines where you're getting an escape of gases that you shouldn't. You get pressures that are higher, and you start shooting oil out of the exhaust, right? And eventually, if you never take care of it, the engine could run away on you. Your oil becomes a fuel source. It revs really high RPMs, and then it explodes. So eventually, it can be a long term. It can be a big problem. But there's a lot of different causes and contributors and all of this stuff. So what I see probably within the next 5 to 10 years is a machine coming in for a repair and you hooking up an AI model to tell you like, hey, here's the problem and here's the steps that you need to take to fix it. Go undo these bolts and go order these parts, and doing, kind of a lot of that analysis for you. So you're getting it right the first time instead of, some of the stuff that we have to do, which is very troubleshooting heavy. So helping mechanics with that troubleshoot piece, getting the instructions for the repair in front of the guy, maybe even some of those glasses that say, like that's the bolt you need to take apart next, kind of thing. So I'd say that's probably like 5 to 10 years from now.
That's interesting. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the human element. You said the robotic welder working next to the welder, these things kind of side by side. How would you imagine things from we'll say the market adoption side? Are these folks eager for this technology? Are these things you mentioned, the AI models and all that, or are they resistant? Because part of what we do here is we help companies understand like where are things moving towards. Wayne Gretzky was an average skater, an average shooter, but had the most brilliant ability to know where things were happening, right? I'm skating to where the puck is going. And so what kind of pushback are these guys, presenting?
Oh man, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but the companies that are willing to do it are going to be the ones that survive. We're seeing a lot of a consolidation, right? So buying, this is such a capital intensive industry in all of them. The barriers to entry are high. Running the equipment is expensive. It dies, early, depending on, how good you are at managing it. It could be, but the companies that are willing to have these conversations, make these adoptions, and on the upturn, are willing to say, okay, we need to continue to improve on the upturn. They're the ones that are gobbling up the competition on the downturn and buying companies based on the value of assets, right? And you're seeing that kind of across the board. If you look at, there was a huge merger down in Australia recently. There's been a few for fracking companies. Like, we're seeing a lot of this consolidation happening in the heavy equipment space of these different companies. And the ones that are winning and buying up the competition are the ones that, are having more conversations with consultants like me. And bringing in, technology and focusing on operational excellence piece.
Interesting.
It's a matter of survival.
Yeah, there are a lot of companies are in a bit of the deer the headlights sometimes when it comes to new technology, AI. There's a lot of fear going around about AI in particular. I mean, it's been in the news all the time where people don't want to do anything because they're afraid that these AI models are going to get out of control and end up taking us over, like the Terminator series, Skynet. Yeah, it's a little bit ridiculous, but you know what? People are going to act on, you said earlier, the good old boys. One interesting model that we talk about a lot is, if your grandfather started the company and you do not want to go in a different direction because that's the way that grandpa did it, you're going to end up being buried next to grandpa, right? You're gonna,
Mm-hmm.
Grandpa himself was a trendsetter back in his day because he did something different,
Exactly.
and people don't realize that. I mean, particularly in family
Exactly.
businesses.
Yes. Exactly.
Now,
That's exactly right.
oh, I'm sure you see it a lot. Um, Tell us a little bit about the demographics on where these machines are being deployed. I mean, certainly mines are going to be where mines are, but with respect to building houses, building factories, building things of that nature, even, do you have a sense of where things are happening from your side?
Um, well, you can. Oh man, I got ahead of myself in my thoughts. Right. So let's start with why they're happening and then where they're happening. How's
Okay.
that? So on the why side, a lot of this post COVID infrastructure investment piece. So you saw this artificial demand drop during COVID. After the pandemic, you get this release of new demand, which overtakes the supply capability, driving prices up. We've got this inflation issue, and governments globally respond with um, eh, dozens of infrastructure projects. We see, the housing getting out of control, and so there's a lot of uh, focus on increasing supply of housing. So, really, globally, there is a construction boom happening. Um, let me give the caveat here. In many of the first world economies, right, there are certainly places where that's not happening, and there's lots of warfare on the Eastern Europe, Western Asia front going on, right? But generally around the world, this is what we're seeing. So where is it happening? I guess I kind of gave a little bit on the where. You could pull up a map, like if you wanted to know the U.S. wise. It's happening to where people are moving, which is kind of interesting. You could almost there's a map where you can look and see, plus and minus. The only problem is that the latest one I saw was county wise. Counties where they're seeing a plus in population and counties where they're seeing a minus in population. That doesn't mean that anywhere inside of that county space is a good place to invest, right? It's highly localized, particularly when it comes to construction. I mean, even within a city, right? You could see a difference just in our, little town of Tucson, of where we're going to see a lot more of our construction and industry growth and the like. And we know that, from what we're seeing, a lot of this northern Tucson off the I-10 corridor and between I-10 and Phoenix is becoming kind of like the next frontier of construction growth. And I think there's probably a multitude of reasons for that we're seeing. So much of it is very local, and it's hard to say one over another. But a lot of communities are facing similar problems right now, like I said, globally, and so you're seeing this construction boom all over the place.
That's interesting. And I know you've done a lot more besides being in the construction, mining, heavy equipment, ag space. I know you've done a lot of supporting companies and looking at saving them money and where are these leaks happening and all that. Give us a little bit of a context of that, and then I've got a few questions, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah. So, I find that we sometimes forget how impactful pulling from the middle of the P&L drives an increase to the bottom line of that profit loss statement. So we know that you have to have that top line sales revenue. And we want to grow and increase our sales. And that's usually where folks will call in assistance to grow their top line. If your margins are, 10%, right? If you are able to pull from the middle and move that margin line up 1 or 2%, that's the equivalent, of 10x of that sales, right? So it's much easier if we can find that small, revenue increase bump by being more lean in our operations, by reducing the amount of space that we need to do whatever it is, or making our employees more productive. All of these things, reducing those individual costs to generate that $1 of revenue. We see it faster on the bottom line, and it's much more in our control than that top line revenue piece. And so my business, my LLC, is called Expense Line Profits for that reason, right? So where do we find the profits? In the expense line. And finding those, when you're in a growth stage, sometimes we make decisions quickly because we have to. And we make a fast decision to get us to the next position. And that decision we made yesterday was not the least expensive one. And so having someone come in, when I go into a business, I don't have any HR issues to worry about. I'm not under the stress of delivery of anything. And I can take the time and think about the problem without all of those stresses and sit down with an employee and watch them work for 8 hours. I can do that. What leader has the time to sit for an entire day and just watch somebody work, right? And so that's where we find these middle lines. Hey, right here, and like I said, tens of millions of dollars. And, one company they were cash flow negative, and we generated all of their cash flow for the last year. It was like a 30% swing to their bottom line just from being able to do that.
That's very, very interesting, Louis. We talk a lot about the trends, the value side of the equation, the revenue side of the equation. So it's a nice breath of fresh air sometimes to talk about the other pieces that are important. I mean, if you're in an industry, if your stuff is not selling because nobody wants to buy it, no amount of pulling from the middle is going to help. I mean, everybody recognizes that. But on the flip side, I think sometimes people focus too much on the middle or even the bottom line and don't worry about, hey, where's the next lily pad we're going to jump to? So it's been a really nice conversation with you, Louis. I think we really appreciate your time. Tell our audience how they can get a hold of you if they have any questions or thoughts.
You can find me on LinkedIn, Louis J. Fernandez, and my website is louisjfernandez.com. So, yeah.
All right. Well, very good, Louis. Thanks for your time. And to our listeners, we'll have a couple more podcasts here before Adam returns. And with that, have a good rest of the day. Cheers.
Thanks, sir.